So when we're picking a route for Train Sim World, there are so many different criteria that we need to think of. And some of those might be, what routes have we made before? Because we don't want to make a slew of the same thing. We want to try and meet a load of different expectations and some of the fun that people want to have in the routes. What countries, what technology have we got in the game that will allow us to deliver these things? Do we need to build lots of new tech, or can we reuse existing? That's not to say we don't do that, but we need to be aware of these things. Can we get access to it? It's great to have a desire to make XYZ route, but if we can't get to it, we can't see how it is, that's a real challenge. That's going to make it much harder to make. What trains run on the route? What trains have we already got? Where can players use their existing collection on these upcoming routes? And what does the new locomotives contribute to that picture? So there's a new locomotive with a route. Can they use that loco on routes they might already own? There's lots of different criteria that we try and apply, but some of those are kind of the challenges we have to balance.
We've done the due diligence, we go deeper, and that means planning research trips, planning access to stations, access to local knowledge. It might well be that somebody lives close to the line, or we need to send somebody out, or somebody in our beta forum can give us some in-depth. It really does depend on the location in the world. So, for example, we're based here in the UK, and making UK routes is relatively easy. If this is a route in California, then gathering that reference is going to be a little bit more difficult. So we have to plan ahead.
So there are some important things that we try and look for in every route that we make. It's not just about driving the trains. You can get out the train and drive and walk around. So what does the route that we're looking at offer the player in terms of that? What's going to be interesting to go and look at? What's going to be interesting to take pictures of? And how is the player going to find that experience when they're driving a train, walking around, looking at the scenery? It's these kinds of things I think are some of the key things we look for, but we don't hold ourselves to anything really steadfast, because it's also important to have a lot of rich variety in terms of the what players can do as well.
One of our first steps when it comes to taking the real world and transforming that into the digital world is research and reference. So we'll normally start off with a plan for the route, which is done through Google Earth in the form of a KML, and we'll highlight sort of like what our actual path is. And then we'll start to identify our sort of key feature areas. This might be relevant to gameplay, or just sort of like iconic assets that really kind of like represent that route. And then we'll normally break that down into whether we have any particular stations for that route, and build references for those individually. And then also identify any really like iconic items or styled assets that are really prevalent to sort of the feel and the sense of place. So that could be something as simple as a certain type of tree, or a certain wall, or sort of like asset that will sort of give that feel as you're driving along.
Some of the things that we start upon is Google Earth. So we get to do KML, KMZ files that actually list out the routes, key locations, branch lines, street view, books, cab rides, internet image searches, Bing Maps. You know, it's a little bit of everything, but nothing beats local knowledge. If there is somebody in the area that we can communicate with and send out, then that is always more desirable, because there's never the information you want. So if we have to make a station, let's just say in New York, there's never going to be the shot that you want. So there's always that issue of what's behind the camera. You know, what does the lay of the land look like? And if we've got local knowledge, we can send somebody out and do a 360 and represent that area respectfully.
But primarily our beta forum has a dedicated bunch of rail enthusiasts that will hold us to account if we get anything wrong. So in the beta forum, we have rail drivers from around the world. We have rail enthusiasts, train spotters, just people from the general areas we're trying to capture. But the uniting factor between them all is the love of trains, and they're wanting to make the product as best as it can be.
So cab rides are useful because they have all the detail that you're going to see up close when you're on the train. You can use Google Earth all you want, but it's not going to show you how high something is. It's not going to show you the exact piece of foliage, the exact fence, the exact what something's going to look like, or even the station. So the station artist will use the cab rides to some extent to see how the station is going to look, and then I would use the cab rides to make sure I've got the boundary correct between the track and how far you can get, the trees correct, anything that I'm going to place, it's going to show you exactly how it looks in real life.
So when we building trains and routes, we try and work with the operators as much as possible to get the authentic experience recreated in the game. And it's not always possible, but in many cases it really is. And working with operators is fantastic. So in a couple of examples, when we modelled the Bakerloo line, we were able to work with Transport for London, who helped us gain access to licenses for fonts, access to licenses for logos and specific imagery, like the famous Sherlock Holmes logos on at Baker Street Station. And then they spent a lot of time actually reviewing the imagery that we've created in the game, and just feeding back on that stuff. That was so really gave us a lot of feedback on how to make it more authentic and how to improve it. Another example, Peninsula, when we built the Peninsula Corridor route in San Francisco, we worked with the operator that runs the line, Caltrain. They invited us over, and we spent a week there, actually with the operators, running up and down the line on the trains, attaching equipment to the trains, getting recordings, talking to the people, the engineers, and talking to the administrative staff, and really understanding the operations of the railway so that we could try and capture it in as much detail as possible. We took thousands of photographs, and they helped us do all of that stuff. It couldn't have been better. And then lastly, another example is when we modeled the TGV route, the LGV. We were able to get hold of really good reference material for the TGV duplex train, but then having modeled the TGV duplex train, we then submitted it to SNCF for their licensing approval. But like a lot of operators, they don't just look at the pictures and say, yes, that's the right usage of the logo. They actually sent us back a 30-page document of tweak this, improve this, change this. You haven't quite captured the way this should feel. And then they sent us some other stuff sort of saying, well, this was when we did our brand guidelines, this is shaped this way because of this. And so we tried to recapture some of that stuff. So actually, we're able to get a lot of really great feedback about the meaning and intent behind the way things work, not just the way that it just visually represents at the end of the day.
We do it every route. There is almost not a route that goes into development that we've not talked to somebody that lives locally, whether it be a driver, a guard, a train fan that has been in touch with us. We do reach out to as many people as possible. The team is comprised of many people who have worked on this for over a decade. And over that time, we've created some amazing friendships and relationships around the world, not just in the countries that we develop for. So yes, every route. It is so important that we have that local knowledge. You can't do an authentic experience without it. It's understanding the foundation. So the foundation is almost always the track and signals, because everything else sits upon those foundations. If the track and signals aren't correct, the gameplay is not correct. If the gameplay is not correct, it's almost irrelevant whether it looks good. So it is making sure that the track lane team and the DEM data that the track sits on is all correct. And once that's all correct, we know that the foundations are solid.
So when we are planning track, it's largely the same process fundamentally, whether we're doing a large route, a small route, a simple route, or a complex route. We put the track down in this marker file that we think we want to do, and then we evaluate, is this the right track plan? Have we made enough? What's the gameplay going to be? Because once you can see it clearly where it is and isn't going to be, you can start planning in your head and on paper, what's it going to do? What are the services going to do? What are the scenarios going to do? And then we might add stuff or remove stuff. So in the case of Long Island, for example, do we go to Hempstead? Do we go to Atlantic Terminal? Do we model Hillside Depot, or do we extend the main line further? What are the extents that we can do with the route? And so we start off just very easily adding and removing and putting different bits in different colors, so we can say, okay, these are options. And eventually we'd settle down on, right, that's the route we're going to make. And then that is then what we then build the terrain and build all the track from based on the resulting file of that. Signaling is really complicated, and it's one of the most important aspects besides the track itself for the driver experience when you're running down the tracks, the signals are there to tell you what's happening, what's up ahead, and what you need to do, depending on which country signaling systems you're doing. And it's really important to get that right. Because you need to know what to do as a player. The simulation needs to tell you what to do, the same way it does in the real world. But also because you can drive the route and have the YouTube video running alongside us. A lot of people do, and you can compare the route. And we have a lot of people who, again, the drivers and signalers that we talk to, they can point to a signal and say, yes, that's exactly what that signal looks like. That's been done and represented correctly. And so we'll use all sorts of different technical information. YouTube cab rides, and cab ride DVDs are some of the most amazing things, because when they've got sufficient detail, we can see this signal looks like this, and it's numbered this, and it's exactly here. And then once we've got all of those in, the team can then start working out, okay, so there's 3,000 signals on Munich-Augsburg. Well, how do those signals all connect to each other and how do they talk to each other? Well, once you know what a signal looks like visually, it's much easier to figure out, oh, it's got this kind of a light on it. That means it's going to talk to this, and this signal. And so we can then piece this whole puzzle together to try and make all the signaling then work. It's much easier to replicate the existing signaling system than to do this full signaling engineering job and actually try and re-signal a route from scratch. So yeah, there's all sorts of technical information. There's a lot of surprisingly technical information available on the web as well, about some of this stuff. And it's really, like many aspects of route creation, it's piecing lots and lots of pieces together to recreate that puzzle.
The key factor in making a route is getting what we call internally the golden mile. And the golden mile is essentially a style guide that dictates what the rest of the route is going to look like, so that if a team is comprised of more than 10 people, the difficulty is maintaining consistency through the length of up to 100 miles. So what we tend to do is the first 2 or 3 weeks of any development is spent making sure that we understand what the essence of the route is. So the golden mile is the essence and the important part of any route. If we've never captured that area before, how do we know that we've got it right and signed off on? And because the team is built up of 5 or 6 people, 7 people more, and they all live in different places, how do they know? They'll just make lots of difference. Even if you're using the same images, they'll make it ever so slightly different. So you need something to keep them consistent. And that's the point of the golden mile, is to make sure that consistency is kept across the length of a long route.
In terms of picking out like the iconic areas or assets that we'll need for a route, we're looking for the sort of things that will sort of make or break an area. So one recent example might be our high speed one, the southeastern high speed route that we recently released. As you're sort of driving into Rochester Station, if you know that area, which I do, I live right down the road from it, you see the castle, you see the cathedral. If that wasn't there on that skyline, you would instantly know that something was wrong. So having something there, as well as an actual representation of the castle, not just sort of a random castle that we've been taken from somewhere else, is really important to get that visual impact of I am driving into Rochester Station. And that can particularly be the case with the much larger stations as well. So one, for example, being Brighton in East Coastway, sort of that approach, so you're getting the full effect, the big arches, the pillars, so as you're driving in, it does feel like I am here, I'm in this place.
The very vast majority of everything you see in a Train Sim World route has been manually placed carefully by hand by one of the art team.
Actually sort of placing the foliage into the world comes in different steps and different stages, and then as it gets to sort of closer to the track and more touchable, we'll actually tend to place these by hand, just so that we can actually be very specific on the location. So it's a sort of quite a big process and quite time consuming, because it's not just necessarily a case of drag out and there's all of your trees. It can be a case of individually altering the position and then thinking of how it sits, how the other foliage sits around it, such as the grass and the bushes, and then how that all blends in with the landscape and the whole feel. So as you're driving along the route, it's not just a case of a wall of trees.
Adding the grasses and the weeds and all the little pieces of clutter, all the little storytelling moments that we try and filter in throughout the route. I think that's really where we elevate the route from something that looks quite plain into something that feels alive.
sort of meet a level of authenticity for the route, there's certain things that will obviously put the attention into, and this can be down to something as simple as the color of the brick on a station building, or making sure that like the platform line is in the correct position from the edge. When we did the Bakerloo underground route, actually having like the mind the gap signs on the floor was really important for us to be like, actually that is a sort of thing that you expect to see. And we'll also try and incorporate some things that, if we can, obviously licensing wise, whether that be like logos within stations that sort of like tell you that that is a station that you're in. If we can have that, then that is really important. And all of that goes through our incredible licensing team to make sure that we can actually achieve making it feel like it's the place that you're actually in.
I think everybody has their own criteria by which they evaluate whether something is authentic. I think for me, I want to be able to experience the route the way that the driver experiences it. I want the train to operate the way that the train would operate, the signals to operate the way they operate, the track to go where it should go, and for all the key buildings that are around me, the things I would use for my braking points, the things I would use as relevant things for the driver, they need to be there and they need to be right, so that when I'm driving I can really capture that experience of being a driver. You need the important scenery around you, but you want to be focusing on being the driver. So it's those kinds of things that for me really make the difference between what's authentic and what's perhaps not quite reached that bar yet. So that's kind of the measure I use against it.
And they've all got their own interests and strengths and weaknesses all at the same time. So we've got some people that are obsessed and passionate about the stations. You've got other people that are passionate about the environment, the foliage. And then you've got, a whole mix of rail enthusiasts, the permanent way, making sure that the track and signals are correct. And the joy in making routes is working with all the different types of individuals and the characters and bringing it all together. It can't just be all about the railway. It can't just all be about the environment. And it can't all just be about the rolling stock. But when you bring all of them together, what you've got is a very believable world. And it makes for a great product. It makes for a great driving experience.
Gameplay is a really interesting topic. Trying to understand how you extract fun gameplay out of something which is fundamentally just trains running up and down all day. Trains are not... the real world tries to boil out all of the strange fun things that happen that you would want to happen in a game, because anything that introduces variation introduces risk, and you don't want any of that to ever happen. So it's trying to work out, well, what are the strange things that might happen on a railway, or is actually what normally happens on the railway actually quite interesting, and it's trying to understand that. And the first step is always what's real. What actually happens, and what are all of the strange things that happen just on a normal basis, because they might not seem strange to the people that drive the trains, but when someone that's not used to the railway comes in and hears the stories, and you're like, oh, so that signal always does that as you come up to it. Well, that's great. Let's make sure we capture that, because we might not have done that otherwise. So we can make sure that these things, these behaviours and the operational interests actually get captured in there. When you look at a train timetable, all you see on the train timetable as a member of the public is train goes from station A, station B, station C, station D. How did it get to station A? And when it reaches station D, what happens to it now? And actually, sometimes some really fun stuff happens with there, in that they don't just go back to station C, B, and A. They go off into a siding somewhere and they wait. And then later on, they come back out again, or they've changed tracks, or they actually do a different run entirely. So it's trying to distill the operations down and work out what actually happens on a day-to-day basis. And then you look at that about, so what could happen? That's the day-to-day stuff. That's cool. We can capture that. What's the other stuff that could happen? Where are the odd maintenance trains that can run on there? What are the other things that can run on there? And then trying to see how we can fit those in as well. And we want to try and make sure we try and capture where it's possible different types of gameplay. Can we do freight? Can we do passenger? Can we do shunting? Can we do express trains, stopping trains? There's all sorts of different types of gameplay that can exist on different routes, but they don't all work on all routes. So it's trying to make sure we try and explore all those possibilities and see how they fit fit, and then from that create the gameplay that ends up in the product. Creating timetables for the timetable mode is a really fun challenge. Timetable in a public timetable, you only see the trains going from A to B. You don't see what happens between, and so sometimes there is actually information available, and you can kind of see, oh, actually, if you piece the puzzle together by following various websites online, you can see actually from platform 5 this train then moves over here and then comes back to there, and then later on in the day becomes that service. Oh, that's how these things link together. Because when you're creating a timetable, you can't just have trains magically going from A to B and then B to A again. There is the thing that happens between there, and we have to capture that and figure it out, or work out what's reasonable and make it up. Because the information actually for that stuff is generally not publicly available. And so it's, well, what's plausible, what's reasonable, what do other railway companies do? It's amazing how many railway companies work in a very similar way, because they all do learn from each other, they talk to each other. So where we've figured out a way that things can happen on one railway, the same practices probably can be applied, if we can't find out the real practices, to come up with an educated best guess for that. And then it's really just recreating the stopping patterns, capturing the timings as much as we can. We generally wouldn't go to the level of capturing the individual times at every station, because there'd be thousands of them. But we would try and capture all of the start times with all of the services from the real timetable wherever possible, and then replicate those. And then the simulation that we do will then tell us what the timings are, and we can populate those all automatically, which gives us a close approximation of the real timetable for the intermediate stops. But all the trains start at the right time. And we can also use the real world data to give everything accurate names. So in the UK, train services have train reporting numbers, like 1A09 would be, an example of a service. So we would, when we get the timetable, you can see all of these reporting numbers. They go into the timetable with their starting times, and wherever possible, do exactly what that service would do according to the real world timetable. And then we put in the glue that links everything together, add in depot moves to put things into depots and out of depots, and try and capture the ebb and flow of a timetable, because at rush hour things get busier, during the day things get quieter. Well, what happens to those trains when it was busy at rush hour in the morning? What happened at lunchtime? Where do those trains go? They don't just disappear. So you get midday depot moves as things come out of service and then come back into service. And it's really capturing all of that stuff into what's going on to recreate the timetable.
Clinchfield is one of the most beautiful routes I've worked on. We got to polish it, and it's, when you got to that part, there's just so much to work with. It's so beautiful in the landscape. You have so many trees in the backdrop. You have like the contrast of maybe the Bakerloo route, where it's just so housey, so central London. But yeah, Clinchfield is just, there's rolling hills in the background. So that's one part. And then the closer you get, there's just, and anything you can add, we have added. There's coal piles, there's little workery scenes where you can go up to. The collectibles as well are hidden so well. I know, because I spent a lot of time hiding them. But everywhere that they're hidden, instead of just being placed, there's a scene built around it. So it makes you feel like you're in a real place, as opposed to just wandering wasteland almost.
So something we like to do on the environment team is to put little Easter eggs in there now and again. So some of our fans might know, but we like to hide donkeys in all of our routes. So we find it quite fun to try and find nice little hiding places for those. So make sure to keep an eye out for those the next time you're playing.
If it's a job where we're on the collectibles pass, usually it's just everyone will place it, especially if you're in charge of working on a station, you'll place the collectibles for that station. But I really enjoy it. So whenever it's collectibles time, I'm like, hello, can I do that? And I'll try and do them all if I can, just because it's fun. So my favorite moment in route building is adding the donkey. The torch has been passed to me to find a home for them each route, and it's lovely bit of fun to do. Once you've done all the complicated bit and the thing that goes all wrong, you get to go in and place the one fun thing to just the cherry on top of the route. Since I've had control of the donkey, I've also been naming each one. I feel like someone's going to enjoy that. So like, who do you have? In HS1, we have I know people have trouble trying to find the donkey in HS1, so I'm going to give you a hint with his name. His name is Thomas. And then in Clinchfield, we have 2 donkeys. One of them is in the main route as usual, and his name is Clive. And then we have another one, which you can only find if you've done Mastery, and his name is Whitstable. So aside from the donkey, yes, we do sneak a few Easter eggs in. A few I won't mention, but there's my favorite one that we did for HS1. My house in real life happens to be trackside, so I got to work on that, and I know exactly what it looks like, so I got to build it. And I'm not entirely sure you can see it or even access it, but if you fly into my house, there is a shrunken down cow, and that would be my cat.
I don't really have a favourite moment of building a route. It's a collection of favourite moments, because for me, one of the things I enjoy the most is seeing the route evolve. You know, the first time I see a route, it's a green landscape that's got some vaguely defined hills and some track on it, and then another time I'll look at it, it's got texturing on the landscape, and the landscape is more clearly defined, and then a little while later there's buildings springing up rapidly as the scenery teams start building, and all of a sudden, in a relatively short space of time, you've gone from this bare landscape with just track on it to this populated landscape, and suddenly you can drive from something that looks virtually finished to something which still looks like it hasn't been started yet, and you see this whole evolution. And I always find that really exciting, seeing this process of these worlds being built so cleverly and quickly by the team to recreate real worlds, and then compare them with, you know, the videos and some of the reference material. And it's just like, wow, they captured that detail. That's amazing that they captured that. That's cool. It's just that's probably my favorite thing, is the whole process. I find really exciting.
One of my favorite routes that we've done recently is the London to Faversham high-speed route, because that is one of the routes that I have personally traveled on. And actually going through the Medway area, it really strikes me how accurate we've made that. It's really nice to see all the features like the castle and the River Medway, just capturing things like the submarine that you see on the way past. All those little features really helped bring Medway to life, and I'm very proud that we managed to recreate Medway so well.
There's got to be almost the last week when everything drops into place, because up until very late in the process, everything's still being moved around and manipulated, and there's still bugs, and there's still, you know, everybody is doing their work throughout, and it's nice to see things evolve, but it's so good when everything comes together, because there are moments where you doubt yourself. There's moments where you feel as though it's not quite right, and then within the last couple of weeks, everything just slots into place, and you drive the route for the first, you know, what feels like the first time, and where there was a blank area, the station's there, you know, the signals are all correct and working, and they're showing the right aspects, and then that is such a great feeling.
My favorite moment of the whole route building process is that final reveal, being able to see everything come together and know that as a team that we've created this product. You know, you've got so many different layers in the development cycle. It's not just the route builders, it's the engineers and QA and everybody just coming together and seeing that final product and being known that it's ready to release. It's like, great, we've like, everybody's proud and should be proud of the work that they've achieved.